Okay, we are recording, and then I'll see where we can put
All right.
this.
Cool. So now we're on to board business. So Mike and Tony, the floor is yours for the tree canopy study results. Thank you for your hard work.
Hey, Michael. Hey, everybody. Thank you. Glad to be here. And also, I was at the for half of the 202 last night. Really interesting. Let me share my screen. Can y'all hear me? Okay.
Loud and clear.
All right.
Yeah, and thanks for showing up to the 202 last night.
Sure.
I saw you
good.
there.
My colleague Brian Stone is a big, he's a Duke graduate, and all he does is brag about Duke basketball. Duke basketball is not doing too well this year, so just trying to give him a little bit of a hard time. Most of you have seen a lot of what we're going to talk about today, but since it's kind of the wrap up of everything, we're going to give you an overview of, from start to finish. I am Tony Giarusso. I'm a researcher at Georgia Tech, and working with Mike Edelson, who is the GIS director at InterDev. And he's been doing work with Decatur for quite a long time. And they brought me in to help with this tree canopy assessment. And so today we're just going to go through what you see in front of you. We're going to briefly talk about what's canopy study, how do we use the results of the canopy study. We're going to jump right in with our findings right away, and then kind of go through how we got to our findings, and then discuss a few recommendations at the end. Generally, I've done several canopy studies for the city of Atlanta. Mike's done a few as well. Canopy study is really an assessment of the quantity of canopy as seen from above. And what canopy means, it's really any tree, leaves, branches, or stems that cover the ground when viewed from above. So it doesn't distinguish between canopy at a certain height. It doesn't distinguish between types of trees, the quality of a tree, or so on. It's really just a quantitative look at your tree canopy. And historically, tree canopy assessments have been done with very low resolution data, 30-meter data that's used for regional assessments, statewide assessments, national assessments. Over the past 10 or 12 years, things have gotten a lot better with higher resolution data, which we used for this study. So you can then kind of go down a little bit further and use this information for local planning. There are studies that are done that bring in elevation data or LiDAR data in conjunction with their aerial imagery to kind of differentiate between heights of trees, but we didn't do that for this study. That usually costs quite a bit of money. It takes a lot of planning to do that. But when you do a canopy study, really you're just looking at the patterns of change over time. And again, you're not really looking at quality so much, but I think when I do canopy studies, I try to get quality into it because I think without the quality look at your trees, it doesn't help that much. If you're just looking at numbers, it can be misleading, I think. Now, the way you use the results, I think for all of you is relatively intuitive. It's really about guiding your decision making in the future. You want to get this information because trees are important for climate, water, air quality, and so on. I think last night when I heard Brian talk about urban heat island, he said a lot of things I had no idea that it was the greatest threat to human health or as far as climate goes. But I think one of the things he said was really important, that somebody asked the question about, are there any cities out there that are really doing climate action plans? And he said, no, not really, at least not in the United States, because they don't have the data they need to make these plans. And I think what you're doing here with the tree canopy assessment is a step in the right direction. You now have data that you can use. It's really fine-grained data that you can use to inform decision-making for these other efforts, not just canopy, but for urban heat island effect, for stormwater runoff, for green infrastructure and things like that. So I really think you should be, if you're not proud of doing this, I think it's a great study that you have, and now you have a baseline information data set on your tree canopy. But again, you're doing this to get information and to educate people about trees in Decatur or canopy. Now the findings, you kind of were shown this a little bit, but really the canopy, we did the assessment between 2009 and 2019, looking at 13 and 17 years in there at the same time. For the most part, the data has remained consistent over those 10 years. There's been change, there's been gains, and there's been losses, but it's relatively no net loss is kind of what I would say, maybe a little bit of loss. And when we say this number, 57%, again, this is an estimate. It's when we do our accuracy assessments or our measures of accuracy, it's within plus or minus 5%. So you could theoretically say it's as high as 62 and as low as 52. You've achieved your 50% goal of canopy, which is great. If you look at your number compared to a lot of cities in Metro Atlanta, and I think that would be a fair comparison. If you're looking at comparing yourselves against others, you're better than Atlanta by 12%, the city of Atlanta. You're consistent, I think, maybe with Brookhaven, but Brookhaven hasn't done this kind of qualitative change looking downward. And then you're better than some other places like Chamblee and Sandy Springs, I think might be around 57%. But one of the big findings, might not be such a eye-opener, is that most of your tree canopy is on the low density residential. And what that means is your tree canopy is in private hands for the most part. You don't have a lot of trees downtown, which is relatively obvious. You do have a higher percentage downtown than other downtowns do, so that's good, I think. As far as your residential neighborhoods go, and you can kind of see on this map on the screen, this map shows the canopy broken down into 1 acre grid cells with the colors representing increments of 10%. So the dark red is 0 to 10%, and then it goes up from there. And so your eastern neighborhoods, both north and southeast, have the highest canopy as far as residential neighborhoods, and your western, especially the southwestern, have lower canopy. But they're all are canopy covered. Some are just a lot higher than others.
Tony, just a quick question. You mentioned that the downtown is fairly high percentage compared to other places. What's the downtown percentage?
Well, here it's, I think if you look at it, it's hard to say because you don't have a downtown boundary. We'll see it on some other slides that come, but I think it's around 15%, somewhere around there. Overall, if you wanted to look at it overall, like the city of Atlanta might be 5%, but they have a big, it's hard to compare, but since you don't have sub boundaries really, except for zoning and land use, it's hard to get an exact number of downtown. Unless you drew a boundary, we could calculate it.
Thanks.
Your gain areas have all been, most of your gain that we see on this has been for fast growth of new plantings that occurred anywhere between 2005 and 2012 or 13, and then in 10 years they've grown up. Street trees, we see a lot of growth in street trees. Depends on the species of trees. Some grow a little faster than others. And then you do have continued growth of established trees, as you would imagine. You know, trees grow. They just don't grow as fast, I think, when they're older. And you have a lot of old trees in Decatur. You know, I know Decatur pretty well now. I've driven around quite a bit in Decatur and was amazed at the amount of old trees that you had, the breadth of distribution. This really is a beautiful city. You have some vistas in Decatur that are just, you come over a hill and all you see, the first thing you see is just a giant tree. And, you know, I can't imagine what it's like in the summer, you know, with all the leaves on. Your loss, the biggest, the biggest reason for loss or cause of loss is single family redevelopment, which was it's the same thing I saw in the city of Atlanta. The big difference I see between city of Atlanta and Decatur is your lots are generally a lot smaller. So you have a lot of single family redevelopment, but it's not huge 2 acre lots for one house. They tend to be smaller lots, but it's happening. And I noticed on my site visits that it's still going on, if not faster than it was 5 years ago. You got a lot going single family or townhomes, that was significant. Some commercial developments, some expansion of existing institutional developments like schools, city facilities, and some other things. And then you have a lot of tree removal due to storms or just cutting trees. And I think that's because your trees are so big and old, and your houses, you're denser than a place like the city of Atlanta. So I noticed more tree removal here than I did in my study in the city of Atlanta. And, you know, a lot of that you can correlate with data on permits or storm information. And some of it, you know, I don't know, you know, what the reason might be, other than it's going over somebody's house usually, or it fell, or it's a threat. But it's kind of our overall findings. We'll dive in a little bit deeper in a couple minutes. But I'll just kind of quickly go through our methods on how we did this, just to refresh your memory, or for the people that haven't been on some of the calls, we'll just kind of go through this. We used leaf-on satellite imagery, or it's not satellite, actually, it's aerial photo imagery provided by the USDA. It has 4 bands of light, near infrared band of light in there, so that we can detect vegetation or trees. So this image you see here is a air photo where the anything that's red has active chlorophyll in it. And essentially you measure the reflectance of the light onto your image, and you group pixels with the same reflectance into classes of land cover. And we break the city into 3 classes of land cover: trees, non-tree vegetation, and non-vegetation. So just looking at this map, you can see here's pink areas, grass, and a little darker is tree canopy or trees. And again, it doesn't distinguish between types of trees. Sometimes we mess up, obviously, or the computer messes up when it groups things together, because trees look like grass and vice versa, or shrubs and so on. It's not an exact science, but it's not designed to be an exact science. So we fix those areas of confusion through manual classification, and I'll show you a slide on that in just a second. So after we do that, we field verify our findings to validate and kind of qualify our findings, and we did that as a group, and we'll go through that in just a second. And after we kind of look on the ground and see how we did and how the computer did, what I do is go back into the computer and then adjust areas that were wrong, and then we do a final accuracy assessment to get some accuracy assessment numbers. So there are a lot of different methods to do, but this is pretty standard of what we did. And it doesn't count trees. And so our result is this: an image we go from something like this to an image like this with 3 separate colors, gray being the non-vegetation, light green being the non-tree vegetation, and then trees, canopy being the dark green. And again, our resolution was 1 meter of pixels, so it was pretty fine grain. You don't really get much more fine grain than that. Some of you have seen a slide before. Sometimes the computer identifies areas as trees that aren't, and that a lot of times that happens with scrub or kudzu. And because Decatur was so small, I was really able to go through this and find all of these. You know, I'm sure there might be a few that I didn't find, but nothing of substantial size, because again, Decatur is so small. But as you can see on these images, this area looked like it was trees, and it's not. It's, on the bridge here, and then same down here. This looks like trees to the computer, but it's simply ivy and kudzu. So once we started manually cleaning up, we did site visits, and the project team did these site visits over here on your left. Essentially, I can't check every site, and the way I usually check sites is break the city into a grid of 1 acre grid cells, and then look at the extremes. So anything that was greater or less than 2 acres of gain or loss, I validated or verified first by just looking at the images on the computer, and then going out and visiting almost every one of these. I think I visited 60 or 70 different sites. You know, to be quite honest, it gets a little boring, especially on the lost ones, because, you know, if you see place cleared of trees. On the computer, chances are it's going to be still cleared of trees on the ground, but the gain ones are a little more, they take some more finesse, and they're the ones you're really trying to validate, I think, when you see large areas of gain. Because unless somebody planted a forest, if you see a large area gain, it's a little bit suspect. So I looked at these sites. We as a group went to these sites here, or some of them on our own, and a few other people, which I think was, I was really appreciative. Other people went to some other sites. They asked me for some other sites to go check. They went out and did it. And I really appreciate everybody's feedback on these things. The one thing I think everybody should keep in mind is that it's hard to do a site visit on tree canopy when there is no canopy when we're in the middle of winter. So, you know, one suggestion next time is really try to align your study with the time of year so that you're going out in the field when there's a lot of canopy, because it's hard. Because you might see something on the ground that looks like, oh, the computer identified it incorrectly as scrub, but in reality, it was covered by canopy above you. And so it can be confusing, I think, when you're doing site visits in the winter. I start with this site visit. I'm going to kind of go through all of the site visits we did together, or most of them, or the ones that I suggested, and then I have a few other site visits to show you what I found. But we'll start with Legacy because that's where we all met. And for those of you who are, this is the first time you're seeing it, the left-hand side is the 2009 imagery. The right-hand side is the 2019. And in this case, everything, the yellow grid cells have showed gain in tree canopy over those 10 years. And I don't have the numbers on here, but they were obviously they were above 2.2 acres in each one. So if you look at these images here, you can see canopy definitely for some trees up here, and then it filled in up here in this cell, and the same with these other cells here. So as we walked around, we walked down here, and then we walked over to here and saw this area as well. And I have some pictures of those. Unfortunately, we didn't go to this area as a group, but I went back and took some pictures of this area. And so we'll show you this is what we saw on the site. So obviously this is not canopy here. This was scrub. It looks like vegetation or canopy on an image because of the height, I think. And it's going to be different than this from the computer's point of view. So whenever I found things that were not truly canopy, I went back into the computer and manually fixed these areas to remove that erroneous calculation. Then at the other end, we saw this. And so this is interesting because it is trees. They are trees there. They're not the same type of canopy as the one in the back, but they are trees. And in the summer, I'm sure it's really covering the ground, but it's scrubby. So it's not the same quality of tree there. But and regardless, I think I went and I cleaned this one up too, so it wouldn't show as gain. And again, we're talking about 0.2 acres here and back and forth. But I think one thing to keep in mind is, even though this is not great quality canopy, it does provide benefits to the ecosystem, maybe just not as much as some of these older trees would. But it's still canopy. It's in a ecological succession. It's at the beginning of, eventually it'll turn into greater canopy. Now, the area that we didn't see are these two, around these two houses here that you see on the image. You don't have, you have a couple trees in front of the house, and then behind it, if you look at this image here, you see a lot of trees. And what these are pine trees. And I think this is a good example to show you how fast things can grow in 10 years. And again, as I'm not an arborist, and you know, I guess before I started doing tree canopy, I didn't really pay attention to how fast trees grow, except if they're in my yard and trying to cover my house. But I've been amazed at how fast trees grow, especially certain kinds of trees, and pine trees seem to be the ones that can just shoot up out of nowhere and cover a field in 10 years. And so this was gain here, this cell, and this one wasn't. I think I looked at this one, and this was some shadow and some other things. So that didn't show up as gain in the final results, but this one was a valid gain site. We all, I think most people who did the site visits on their own went to these sites. This is MODA. And this is a mix between gain and loss. The center of these images is MODA. So MODA in 2009 and MODA in 2019. Across the street, we saw some gain at the corner of Church and Medlock. And then to the south along Church at Nob Hill, we saw some gain in the middle. So went to each one of these to validate these. And not too hard to validate that MODA was a lot of tree loss, right? So there's been some replantings here as well, but a very big a scrape, which you would imagine with townhome development. You usually lose all your trees and then eventually you get some back. Here is Nob Hill. I thought this was interesting. This, I think I had a few people on the site team not consider this gain, but as far as our study goes, this is definitely gain. Again, it's not a 30 or 50-year oak tree, but it's forest. It's trees and it's covering the ground. It provides benefits. So it definitely showed up as gain. It's all around the pool, different species of trees there. I can imagine in the summertime there are lots of birds in those trees, but that picked up, that was valid gain. And then across the street, Medlock and Church was definitely gain as well. And here, sometimes I'm throwing in street view imagery since we were in the winter time. I think it just is better to see like the overhang of trees across the street. That's what we were picking up, as well as these kind of street tree plantings at that little intersection right there. So that one was validated as well. Here we have Glen Court and FORKNER, and FORKNER was lost due to single family residential. You can see right here trees, and then on here the lot has been cleared and single family residential put in. And then on this side we have Glen Court going back, these single family homes, kind of I don't know what you would call it, maybe a cluster subdivision, and then a lot of street tree growth on those. And this is Glen Court, and it was definitely valid. Again, mostly street trees. You know, this one was one we picked up for sure. I think I took this picture just to show that this tree doesn't have a lot of room to grow, but it is a tree, and it's the canopy was the growth in canopy was visualized pretty well. And FORKNER was lost, and unfortunately FORKNER, most of the loss is behind the house. You see that, and they planted some trees in the front. I don't know when this development happened, but if these are new trees based on that size, it wasn't last year or 2 years ago. It was early, maybe 2013 through 16 or something. But a lot of the loss on this site was behind the house with the pool and the big backyards, cleared backyards. This one, I don't think any of you went to this site, and I couldn't get in, obviously, but this is on Scott Boulevard, townhome, the Brownstones in Decatur. And the gain that we were seeing here was kind of on the back edge, but mostly in the center and along the street here, up in the front. And so when I went, I obviously couldn't get in, but these are the group of trees that we see as growth here along the front. And again, definitely considered canopy as far as these studies go. So we validated that one. Median trees on East College. Again, more canopy, hard to dispute this one. This is city plantings, I believe. And my picture wouldn't do it justice. That's Google Street View is a lot better. You know, part of me is glad I started using Street View on this one, because the pictures are very good. It's kind of scary, but you get some really good pictures. I don't necessarily need to do site view. The problem is I don't know exactly what the dates are for Street View, but again, gain on the median here. These trees grew up nicely in over 10 years. All right, here's a kind of a big area. A lot of people went to this area of Mead Avenue, Olympic, and Ansley, and other areas around here as well. I got a lot of feedback on sites that we didn't identify, but that were changing. And I saw places, a lot of change that was happening, obviously in the last 2 years and right today, changing. So a lot of loss, and this is very typical, I think, of what I saw in the city of Atlanta and across Decatur, maybe just a little bit denser in this part of town as far as the amount of redevelopment going. Again, your lots are very small compared to the city of Atlanta. So it's a little harder to pick up the loss here, because a lot of times you might clear a lot for a new house and the tree next to it is still leaning over into the lot that was just cleared. As this is a good example here. This is ANSLEY, this square I'm showing right here in 2009. The whole grid, 1 acre of trees essentially there. And then when you go to 2019, it's a kind of a swath that was cut. And you'll see when I show you the picture of the house that this tree is still there, and it looks like it hangs over the house, but some trees were cut. These are a little bit more straightforward. There was some trees here, but we're just essentially all cut down to put a lot of houses in a row. It's been my impression that when you do a development that's one at a time, your impact is less. If a developer that comes in and buys 5 lots in a row and does them all at one time, it's almost inevitable that it's going to be a scrape as opposed to a pruning of the canopy, I guess is a way you could say it. So let's look at some of these pictures. This was Olympic. So both sides of the street, you can kind of see just cleared here, and 3 new homes, and you know, some tree plantings here, but it's mostly shrubs replanted, and then so the trees are behind the house now. And then this is across the street. I didn't get a great view, but you can kind of see it, and I have some street view pictures of it in just a second. Here's MEAD Avenue. This picture looks like there's no trees on the lot, but you'll see the street view in just a second. There's some trees out of the picture here, but looks cleared. Here's ANSLEY. So here's where I'm showing you the trees were cleared right. This house goes like this. This tree is right next to the house, really 15 feet from it. So it's still kind of, it's still there, but you know, if this next house got redeveloped, that tree would almost certainly be taken out. And here are the views. This is MEAD Avenue. So this gives you an idea of some of the trees that were replanted on this site. So I imagine on this site, we will see growth. If you do this in 10 years again, you'll see growth on this site. So it's a cycle, really. I mean, you have to imagine that when the original houses were built on these lots, that there were no trees also, or very few. And, you know, over time, the trees grew back, so the canopy's kind of dynamically changing. I guess you just don't want to get ahead of yourself, right? You don't want to clear too much and have to wait for it to grow back. And I don't see that happening as much in Decatur as in the city of Atlanta, but you know, something to be aware of. And I think most of you are aware of it, that single family is the threat, because it's, you know, a lot of the houses are older, people have more money, and so on. You have great schools, people want to come to Decatur and live there. All right, so next one, Candler Drive and Candler Point. We saw some gain here, and then a little bit of loss in the backyards. And a couple of you went to do the site visits here. I appreciate it. This one was interesting because you can see this image has a lot of shadow. Usually it's telling you that these trees right here are pretty tall, and so it's going over something. So when I went in and looked at this, let me back up here. You can see that these trees were young here, and then they grew up here, and these are the trees that we were picking up here on that grid cell. And you can see in the center of the roundabout, that tree is substantially taller, I would imagine, than it was 10 years ago. But there are also areas that at the end of that cul-de-sac that were scrubby here. And so this was kind of hard, because it's hard to tell if those were picked up by the imagery, because in the summer, chances are the canopy was overhanging there. But I went in and kind of redid this area on my own. I think one of the cells didn't turn out to be gain, and the other one did. And again, here's a kind of a picture of what it looks like in the summer. This area did not get picked up as trees, even though it's kind of taller than a car, but it wasn't picked up as trees. And I certainly made sure that it wasn't when I went back in and manually did it. But you can see the growth here and so on. You can't see the backyards here, but these are the homes that have the backyard development. And on this street, the houses across the street from these two had been redeveloped, I think, since 2019 and looked to be cleared of trees. And so, you know, it's almost contagious, right, in neighborhoods when this couple houses go down, you know, the developers. My street where I live near Lakeside High School. It's that's the way it is. There's three redevelopments going on my street. Columbia Drive, this is collectively the biggest loss indicator. So I think, and these are townhomes. I can't remember off the top of my head what it was, but I think it was around, if you look at it, if each cell is 1 acre, it's roughly 6 or 7 acres of tree canopy. And it's a townhome development, single family. So again, you're going to get, generally when you do this, it's very hard to require, I guess, for them to leave large trees, but it's something you should look at because these do take big swaths of canopy. The benefit of this, I think, maybe not so much in Decatur, because in Decatur, when you're doing single family redevelopment, you're generally not, you're not replacing a house with a house that's 4 or 5 times as big as the original house there. So you're still, your density is staying the same. Here, this is increasing density of Decatur, which I think a lot of people would argue is a good thing. I think some people who live there might not say the same thing, but it's generally a better idea to replace density in an urban environment with a little bit of higher density, as long as you can balance that with preserving your environment. Of course, you don't want to scrape everything and be just a concrete jungle. In that same area, we lost a big tree, and there's just a picture of a stump. So this is a good example of a site that was forested. It was probably a single family residential home or one development here on this side, and then it became a small subdivision, kind of re-subdivided. The good thing here is that you'll see growth back here. There's lots of trees planted. They look healthy, and they look like they're growing. So, you know, something positive to be said about that. This one was very interesting. This is Taqueria del Sol right here, Fairview Avenue, going back this way. And this one was confusing. You can kind of see the trees here and these cells right here, and then they're gone in this. And I believe it was trees trimmed because of the power lines. And Georgia Power can come in if the power lines are in trouble and cut these trees. And to me, that's exactly what this looks like. I mean, this is the intersection right here. That's right here. So I think this tree is this right here still, and then this tree back here doesn't look too good anymore. And it was this one maybe here or something right there. But that kind of is I think that was the best example of, I could see the branch that had been cut possibly. But again, kind of no development effect. It's just that tree is old and is going to need to maintain, and likely it's going to come down. I don't know when, but sooner maybe rather than later. All right, GLENLAKE Park and Cemetery. This was a very interesting site. This showed a lot of gain, and I had some people go out and do site visits here. This one, you got some trees growing right in the center of the cemetery. You have some areas around the park, the little stream right here along the parking lot. So I think it's important to look at the cell over here, and you don't really see much. And then you see some trees growing right here that were planted. And then you see some trees back in here and over here as well, and around the tennis courts. And these are some pictures, so you can see this. These are truly trees growing right here. It's not really scrub. Kind of along the stream corridor, it's trees. They might not be the best quality, but they're filling in. It's not just non-tree vegetation. And then this I thought was a great shot. I can imagine in the summertime that along this trail, it is quite canopy covered right there. I really
Tony,
yeah.
This is Annie. I actually live over here. So one of my questions about this picture on the right is what you see green under the trees. most of the trees on that whole pathway are covered in ivy.
Well, you wouldn't pick that up. I mean, that's a good point. That's valid. We are not going to pick any poor quality of the trees. We're not really going to pick that up through the imagery. So I think as you as citizens identifying those areas, I think that is a good way to kind of supplement this information. Just because we're saying that there are trees there doesn't mean that they're the most healthy trees and the pristine, but we can't tell that really from the imagery. We can tell it if the canopy is covered by the kudzu, but if it's grown up the sides, there's no way you can see it. Or if it's under it, you know, it's kind of, if you're flying over in an airplane or a helicopter, you have to have that kind of perspective, unfortunately. So it's really just informative. I think it really, if you have people like you helping out and supplementing this information, it can only add benefit. I only wish that the city of Atlanta was 2,000 acres and had people like you that were really dedicated to this. I think you have a lot of value to add to this. So here's an example of the canopy that grew inside of the cemetery. This is my first time, you know, it's sad to say, I live here, I grew up here in Atlanta. I've been here, and this is the first time I ever drove into the cemetery there. Actually went in with my daughter. It was beautiful. Really, really nice. A great, you know, if I lived there, that is where I'd walk, I would think, if I was in walking distance. A great place to walk, peaceful. There was scrub on one of the cells that we showed as gain. It was very scrubby vegetation like this, right? Kind of just shot up. So I went in and manually kind of cleaned some of this up. I'm not sure what type of trees these are, but again, I think in the summer it would be, it would probably be teeming with wildlife back in there, I can imagine. But again, not the same quality of canopy as the bigger trees on the site. Okay, this was an interesting site. This is HILLCREST. This is on the east side. This is an older neighborhood, and so you're kind of, this road dead ends. You're back. These are apartments here and apartments over here on this side, and you can see from on this cell a lot of trees filled in. And so when I went back there, you know, most of the time when you see gain, it's from young trees, you know, in like Nob Hill, in the middle of a development. They might not be oak trees, but you see quick growth. And here, it took me a second. So I parked back here, and really what it is, it's just, this is older growth kind of going over the road, covering the road. You do have some street trees on this side, filling in the canopy, but a lot of it was just kind of older trees that were filling in open areas, I think. I couldn't see any scrub around there really that would confuse it. It was just trees. And, you know, I really like this area of Decatur. I hadn't driven around in this part. It was very forested. It was really, again, I wish it was in the summer when I was, or in the summer when I was going around here. So this one was a valid gain. Here, this site, I wanted to put this one in here. This is OAKHURST Commons Drive. I believe this is kind of on the southern edge of the city. It might have been along Midway, if I remember correctly. But a townhome development. And
it's along McDonough.
Say that again. McDonough is McDonough. Okay.
Yep.
Townhome development, you can see the trees planted right in front of each of the townhomes here. So this was probably built, just looking at this, in the early 2000s sometime. And there are the trees now. So quite substantial growth there. And I imagine they'll be needing to be maintained. I can imagine this is a very forested little townhome development in the summertime. So cooling down this neighborhood, providing some habitat, but yeah, definitely pick this up as growth. Just maybe, you know, I think the one of the issues you always run into when you're planting trees in these types of development is how big can these trees really grow? because the amount of soil that they have. So these are things you think of as really kind of trying to be inventive on maximizing the space for growth while balancing, you know, the maintenance of the tree is when it's that close to your home. And the last one is this place on Claremont, across from big church here. This is almost into Decatur, 419 Claremont. And you see a lot of growth. Let me jump back here, but you see growth in this cell here and these trees down here. The canopy has definitely grown up in 10 years. And these are just some big trees you're seeing filling in, covering up the area. So I think that's it on the site visits. So again, I really appreciate everybody. I know that was kind of that's probably the biggest piece of the presentation, but I wanted to show what my thought process is when we're doing these site visits, and really remembering that the study just measures the growth of trees. It doesn't differentiate between good trees and bad trees, and so on. So we're picking up canopy because when you do canopy benefit estimates, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end of this, is that it definitely doesn't differentiate between types of trees when you're putting out benefits estimates. It's really the entire canopy, which might not be 100% accurate, but that's the way usually it's done. So after you do all the site visits, I go back in and do an accuracy assessment for each year of the imagery. We pick 250 randomly stratified points across Decatur, and essentially we look at a historic image of Decatur. So we have a picture here, and then what did we think it was? Was it tree or non-tree vegetation? And we compare the two, and then we get a final accuracy assessment result. And usually if you did well, it's right around this high 80s to low 90s is really what you're looking for. You're never going to get anything over 95%. Unless you have lots and lots of money to do this. If you're historically, when you're using low resolution imagery, you would get assessments of 70%, 75%. So I think we fell in right where we thought we would fall in. So we can be pretty confident that our estimates are plus or minus 5%. All right, so then once we do this is when it's great for me. Once I'm finally finished, I can then start aggregating everything together and kind of analyzing it and looking at it over time. And so now I'll quickly kind of go through some maps of our results, and then we'll talk about a few recommendations here at the end. But our results are like this. Here you're going to see a map on the left. I'm just going to scroll through each year. There's not a lot of difference that you can see, because again, you pretty much have remained no net loss. On the right here, you have bar graphs showing the canopy for each year, and non-tree vegetation and non-vegetation up here. The percentages are the percentages, obviously, and the numbers below are the acres of canopy. So in 2009, you had 57.1%. And sorry, I called this 2010. I just got locked into that. It's 2009. In 2013, you went up a little bit. That could be the imagery was different, maybe a lot of shadows, but it also could be a result of the lack of development that was going on from 2008 to maybe 2012 or 2013. And since Decatur is so small, a percentage point is really 30 acres. So 30 acres of growth from all of your trees, and might not be that crazy if development really slowed down. So that was just kind of my idea. But again, keep in mind that it's plus or minus 5%. So when you see numbers like this, just because it says 57.1 and 56.9, they really are all very much the same. It's not, you can't say, get hooked on, we lost 2 percentage points. I think you need to look at the trends of what's been happening. in the city, and you've been losing trees due to development, but you've been replacing them with other canopy gains through planting, street trees, and so on. So you are maintaining kind of no net loss.
And Tony, does the 5% margin of error apply across these four?
Yes, the four. Yeah, but think of this too. So I would not look at non-vegetation. I wouldn't look at these two as that's their real numbers, because if you really wanted to measure non-vegetation or impervious surface or non-tree vegetation, you would do that with imagery that didn't have the leaves on, because you're getting things covered with a canopy. And so we do this just as a proxy for these two, but if you're really trying to study these, I think you're better off doing another study when you don't have the leaves on the trees, especially for impervious. That's why when you look at Google Maps and usually when any city has imagery flown, they're more, unfortunately, they're not as concerned with the trees. They're concerned with seeing through the trees and seeing the buildings and the impervious surface for utilities, for what have you. But there is a trend. You can kind of see, right? You've gone from less impervious surface to more impervious surface over those 10 years. And you've gone from less non-vegetation or more non-tree vegetation to less non-tree vegetation. So that is a trend you could look at and be confident, I think, that at least as far as canopy covered land cover classes, you're right on. So once we did all this, I put this this decile map together. You've seen this already, but it shows the distribution. I think this is a good way to look at just the distribution of canopy across the city. And now that you have the data, if you wanted to, you could do the same thing with impervious surface or non-tree vegetation. You know, so in the city of Atlanta, what I did is I took this grid and I created a planting index for the city. And I think you could do this, the city could do this after the fact by measuring the amount, finding the cells that have the least amount of trees and the most amount of non-tree vegetation and identifying those for places to plant. There's ways you can take this data and use it to identify planting sites. You know, I didn't look at that this time, but I've done that in the past with the city of Atlanta. It might be better on bigger grid cells, but it's still a way you can use this data to kind of help you look for planting sites. Here's the change. Again, I did a change of loss or greater than 2 acres to kind of show you, and this is, they'll show you that some of those legacy site ones, the gain ones, aren't showing up anymore over here. They were taken out except for that one gain site. And then I kind of qualified the gain in each of these by looking at the imageries and these grids. These are graphs just showing you, these are some numbers that give you an idea of the amount of gain and loss. So if we're fixated on kind of on numbers, we've got 131 acres of loss versus 120 acres of gain over the 10 years. And then a lot of it is just in between the two. It really isn't loss or gain. But you can see the loss, you have areas of loss that are bigger than 0.2. With gain, you almost don't have anything that's a gain over 0.3 acres. I would think the ones that are 0.3 acres are going to be developments like those townhomes where it's really fast growing and shot up quickly. Here's how I qualified the change into 2 categories after this. We're talking from young tree growth for gain to typical growth. These are just the number of sites that I inspected, just to give you an idea again of trends of what were your causes, kind of qualifying the change. And you don't see this kind of analysis in most tree canopy studies. Most tree canopy studies leave it at the maps and say, or that first slide I showed with, here's the graph, here's the change, let's leave it at that. And if you leave it at that, it's not going to be very informative because you're just going to doubt things, I think. And I think we took it a step further and went out and said, this is why you saw loss and this is why you saw gain. And these are the reasons for it. So again, loss, single family was the big one. some maintenance. That maintenance is really kind of, that's probably a bad term there for the tree loss, but this was individual tree loss, loss of limbs due to storms, due to discretionary cutting, and so on. And again, I didn't see this in the city of Atlanta, and I think it's because you have such big trees in Decatur, and your houses are so close together, and my grid cell wasn't a 1 acre size in the city of Atlanta either when I did my analysis there. So I didn't pick this up very much in the city of Atlanta. But you know, you have storms, you have trees down. You saw that picture of the giant tree down, and I think because you have such old trees there, you might have more trees trimmed, and it's easier to pick up on this analysis. Then you have your other loss categories: multifamily, institutional, and so on, down to some natural loss. And that was in a legacy, I think, Beaver Pond and the dam. Okay, now a couple of those last couple slides are going to show aggregating canopy to different geography levels in the city. So we have land use, and this is future land use here. So commercial and high density residential are lumped together. You have institutional, parks and green space, low density residential, and then medium density residential. And the map on the right shows you kind of the distribution here. I don't think the map is as powerful as something like this. This graph will show you the land cover by land use. So in your residential land use, low density residential, you have 72% of that is covered by canopy, 1,000 acres. And then you can see the breakdown of non-tree vegetation and so on. And then next goes to your parks. 57% of your parks are covered by tree canopy. You can keep that in mind. You know, I guess when I look at legacy, I kind of think of that as a park, but it's not thrown into park category there. It's thrown into the institutional. So that might affect this. I would think it might lower it a bit because it's not completely covered at legacy from canopy. And you have medium residential, high, everything is pretty high except your commercial and high density residential, right? So this is getting back to your point, Michael, I think about the, what's the value of downtown. You could think it might be around this, an average, but that takes into all of these categories, your average cover. And we have zoning. So the same thing, but just categorized a little bit differently, and we've broken it out into all the zoning categories. So you have, you can look at that and see, and you'll be able to look at this slideshow. I would think it'll be made available to all of you to kind of look at it a little in more depth. It's a lot of information to cover this quickly. But really, ultimately, what you're seeing, and I don't think it's a surprise, is your city is mostly single-family residential, and your trees are mostly on your single-family residential lots. And your commercial areas have the least amount of tree canopy, and everything in between is in between. I did this at the request of some of you. We were able to get the impervious surface layer for the city of Decatur. That's this map you see here on the left. You know, I don't know the date of that, Hugh. Maybe you could chime in and tell me what date that was. But it was done before Legacy Park was part of it, I think, because you can see there's no impervious here in Legacy, and then up here in this part of the city. So I can give you an idea of the date. The first graph up here on the top right is showing you the percentage of impervious. And now that I think about it, that's going to be misleading because I think I used the city boundaries in 2019 to calculate this. So it's going to be an underestimate because you can see we don't have any impervious here. So imagine it went up to 45 or 47% of the impervious, or maybe less. But that's the ratio right now based on this data. And then the canopy is a little more accurate because what I then did is I overlaid the tree canopy on top of this impervious surface. And of that 1,200 acres of impervious surface in the city of Decatur, 424, 35% of the impervious surface is covered by canopy. and 65% is not covered by canopy. Unfortunately, I couldn't really make a map of what was covered and what wasn't covered because the way the impervious surface layer was created, it didn't permit that. But you know, I didn't have enough time really to investigate how that was created or try to fix it to where I could do that. But that's something you could possibly look at later on. But it still gives you an idea, I think, of how much impervious you have covered by canopy. And I don't know. I've never done this for the city of Atlanta, so I don't know of any other city to compare this to, but kind of getting back to Brian's point about having data on a small scale for your city, this is some data that's very, it's a baseline, right? At least now you know that you have 35% of your impervious is covered by canopy, so you can measure this later on, and maybe you can find some literature out there that would tell you what that effect is on cooling of your city or so on. I'm sure Brian would be I know Brian is, I think he's putting in some sensors maybe in Decatur. So this data is definitely going to help him in his models of heat island in Decatur. So you're doing great by kind of getting this comprehensive look at your environment, and the canopy study is just really one piece that can be used in a lot of different models. Okay, finally, we never talked about this before because I wasn't sure we were going to be able to do this, but if you're unfamiliar with iTree Canopy, it's a program, you can look it up on the internet, program developed by the U.S. Forest Service. It's been around for quite a long time. It's a suite of tools. iTree Canopy is one module in this suite of tools called iTree, where they model canopy and other ecosystem features, and they model the benefits of those. Anybody can use iTree Canopy to determine the canopy for the city of Decatur. I don't know if any of you have done it yet, but you can do it for your own neighborhood, where you simply go in and follow the directions and choose points and say, and identify on the image. It's a Google air photo image. You say that's a tree, that's a building, and so on, and it will spit out a report and tell you what your canopy coverage is and so on. And one of the things that I think people like about this is it quantifies these benefits in dollar values and amounts. And I was able to take their formulas and use what we determined for canopy in the city of Decatur and back out their formulas essentially to give you values of in dollars and amounts of these benefits for the city of Decatur. So you have carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, sulfur dioxide, particulate matter, and CO2 sequestered annually in trees. And you have those monetary benefits and the amounts there. And then you have one benefit that's not an annual rate, which is just your overall CO2 stored in all of your trees. And you know, here's the values that they use to calculate these. So I just thought we would put this together to give you an idea. You know, I don't know exactly how this would be used, but I think it's just more information that you have at your in your hands now. You can look at the benefits of your canopy and do this again in 10 years and see how they've changed. But the people that have developed this are kind of the leading experts in tree canopy around the nation. There's a guy named David Nowak. I think if you're a tree person, you might have heard his name before. He was, I think he was the keynote speaker at Tree Atlanta's Canopy Conference last year. But he developed this program. And anyway, take a look at it. It's really there for you to just kind of think about. And then I think we're almost at the end. So what is everything, what are the implications of your canopy in Decatur? What's happening? I think you should be proud that your canopy values are relatively stable. I mean, maybe you don't have, maybe you have places that have kudzu or invasives and so on that need to be looked at. But overall, you have no net loss really of tree canopy in the city. One thing to keep in mind is though that everything is on private property for the most part, and that kind of puts it in the citizens' hands So, and developers almost. Your developments continue to increase over the last decade, and my experience is that it hadn't stopped during the pandemic at all. And that is the biggest cause of loss, is your single family. One thing I kind of glossed over this, I didn't really even mention it. We looked at trees, canopy in the right of way for Decatur, and there was quite a bit. That kind of jumped out to me. I mean, you have a lot of right of way in Decatur, probably because of the rail line, but you have a lot of right of way. And so you do have some trees in public space, quasi-public, I guess, space there. And so that's something of note, I think. Your gain, again, newer developments, a lot of younger trees and street trees. And like I've mentioned, you do have a lot of old trees in the city. And so you need to start thinking about preserving those trees, replanting to replace them when they come down, and so on. A couple other things of recommendation. If you can, the city does this, they really are starting to do this, City of Atlanta, is try to protect the remaining tracts of land that are undisturbed forests. Buy them, set them aside. I always think about, if you can see it from space, like on an air photo, it's probably worthy of protection if there's that much forest, because it probably won't be there in 100 years. But it will be replaced. But I think a good way to kind of mitigate your loss is to protect trees, permanently protect trees. In the South, we're a lot different than a lot of northern cities. A lot of northern cities, more urbanized, much of their tree canopy is in public hands, like especially in the city of New York, right? It's Central Park, but other cities like Minnesota or Minneapolis, a lot of their trees are in public hands, so they're in public parks and so on. So something to think about is trying to figure out how you can protect those. Obviously, try to figure out how you can mitigate the loss of trees during single-family redevelopment. I think that's definitely a takeaway from this. When you're building subdivisions and townhome developments, try to implement conservation measures somehow. This is where you might think about green roofs and other strategies to mitigate the loss of trees and increase the somehow combat that tree loss. And really, the last one is, I think, is the most important thing, is that when you're planting trees, when you're taking down trees and you're replanting them, you need to plant trees that are going to have similar canopies as the one that came down. They need to be native, they need to be non-invasive, and so on. You don't want to just let people run haphazard on planting trees, because I think many developers are going to look for the least expensive option, and they're not going to look for the most environmentally friendly option unless you kind of mandate that. But I think in Decatur, from what I've seen, the trees that were replanted, especially the street trees, they're maintained well. They're appropriate for the most part, and I think they look good. So that might be it. That is it. So that was a lot. I hope, again, I appreciate everybody's involvement in this. And, we'll take some questions now, I think.
Thank you so much, Tony. This is great to hear. And we really appreciate this, especially your thoroughness in going through the methods so that we can have good faith in the results. Just a reminder to everybody, questions will only be from the board, but we will have time for public comment at the end. So board members, questions you may have?
I have two quick ones. First, again, ditto, Tony, Mike, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to do the site inspections with you all, get to know you a little more as well. This is wonderful. Two quick ones, which maybe you have the answer to, maybe you don't. Do you know, did you break out legacy? For my own curiosity, what is the total canopy coverage there? Do you know that?
I didn't break it out, no.
Okay, I was just interested.
I could do that.
Probably underneath the average of the.
My guess is it would be, yeah, because it seemed like, just looking at it, the forest is in the back.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then the other thing was, is it possible, can we get a GIS layer of this data?
Sure. Yeah, I think Mike can answer that, but I imagine most of this in a month or two will go up onto a one-stop Decatur or
The one map?
Yeah, one map.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, that's the plan. We'll grab, at the end, we'll take all this and send it to the GIS department. And I've already talked to Nathan Holman, who's there, gave him a heads up that this is coming. And he was talking about either adding it to one map or its own application. That'll actually be out, once we're all done, we put a bow on this, that's when we'll send it to Nathan, and then he'll be able to kind of work it into those applications.
Oh, that's great. Well, thanks again, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate it, Rich.
Yeah, this is Annie. I was wondering, Tony, if the city itself might break down these mappings into quadrants, to take a look at quadrants of the city and kind of where each quadrant is. So taking downtown, pulling downtown out and letting it be its own thing, and then dividing the city up in some way that makes it easier to explore problem sets in particular quadrants to be able to deal with these easier.
You know, I don't know if they have any plans to do that, but it wouldn't be hard. I think given what we've done and the way it's there, the GIS person at Decatur could easily probably do that. Would be pretty easy. I think as long as you're explicit on what you want, how you wanted it divided up, it wouldn't be a big deal at all.
Yeah, and for example, we've done in the past, I've done it by like a commissioner districts, like one city wanted it that way. Another city actually wanted it by watersheds or kind of sub watersheds. So I think Decatur doesn't have a whole lot of city council or commissioner districts, but I think you have a few different, creek systems, something like that. So just ideas like that. Once we hand over that data, you just define the boundaries, however you want to see them, and move on. And we did a little bit of that with the land use. It's the same concept, land use and zoning.
Tony,
Yeah.
You showed the data really quick, and I didn't get a chance to sort of pull it out and do the change myself. But what's the change for single family residential? You mentioned that as one of the real challenges. How did that change over time from 2009 to 2019?
So I didn't look at the zoning because I didn't have zoning from 2009 to 2019. I didn't have those two different time periods for zoning or for land use. So I couldn't really look at the change. Unless you're looking at, and I don't know if you would really see much. My guess is when I done that in the city of Atlanta, you don't see any change in the amount that's done. It seems to be the same. Maybe that's because the zoning districts change size. I think zoning in the city of Atlanta changes quite a bit. I don't know how often it changes here, but I wasn't able to do that.
And then the SF residential, that leading cause of loss in the single family residential, can we look? Yeah, this is what I wanted to look at in terms of land cover. So tiny though. I might have to look at the slides.
No, that's fine. This breaks it down by the end. So the difference, this map doesn't show, it doesn't correlate with this one because when you look at this map and you look at all the little zones, you can't see them very well. So I kind of aggregated them all together. I guess I could pretty easily go in and say, what was the canopy in 2009 in R85 in 2019 and do a change that way. But, and maybe that would be, you would see something. I don't think you would see something at R60 because it's so big. You might see it on a smaller one, but again, since zoning changes, I haven't done that historically, really. But at the same time, I didn't calculate it for 2009. So it would be good to have that graph at least.
Yeah, that'd be great to just sort of see the change so we
Yeah.
have an idea of like
Yeah.
where those changes are occurring. Even if we don't know what the zoning was in 2009, it just
Yeah,
says
that's,
right, the same spot. Yeah.
I can do that pretty easily. So I'll do that for the zoning and the land use, both of those two.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Mary Jane. I'm just blown away by all this information. This is fantastic. And I really thank you guys for being responsive to our request for some of this detail. And I just feel like this is a fantastic tool for the city. My question is actually for our city staff. And I just want to make sure that this is going to be used. Are the departments going to be taking a deep dive into this as well? I guess, Andrea, maybe you could answer that. Planning, Public Works, even on some of the other advisory boards, DDA, for example.
So Mary Jane, I think, I'll just say, I think Mike kind of already alluded to this, that this is a great data set that we will have. And so we can do a lot of different things with it. For example, doing it by watershed, I think kind of goes back to what we were talking about at our January meeting. And so I think this is something that will be very, very useful, and especially as we move forward with some other climate work, and once we get some heat island data.
Absolutely.
So yeah, we'll have this, and
the presentation itself will be available with the explanation from.
Yeah, so we'll have the presentation itself available, but then once Tony and Mike finish up the report, I could certainly see us doing an intra-staff meeting or something to share the results.
Okay.
I'll look at watersheds too. I think I thought I did beginning of the study, and I didn't see any watersheds, like there were 2 or something at the scale I looked at. I'll see if I can go down further and get the smallest possible watersheds that are available out there, and then I'll compile it. It might not be in the report, and it might not be in the presentation, but I'll compile it, and then they can put it up on the new map that they'll put out.
Some of that might be available by Hatham and some of his presentation from the last time from, and certainly if we get funded for the watershed study, we'll have that, which would be
Okay.
great.
Yeah, and like Mike said, worst case is you do it later. You'll have the data and somebody can do it.
Yeah.
I think there's 3 or 4 HUD.
Like what size hucks?
Yeah, the hucks, right. I mean, I think there's 2 major where it's basically the train tracks.
Right.
Some sub watershed areas in there. At least 4 that I can remember. Almost is kind of a quad.
Okay.
Yeah, there's
I
4
can
on
work
our
with you, Tony, to
stormwater
get that
master
stuff.
plan shows
Yeah.
four major watersheds.
Okay, probably
Okay.
like Huck 12s maybe.
Yeah.
4 main ones that you can pull out pretty easy. But I had a naive question. It's Friday morning, so forgive me if I totally missed it. But going back to Michael's question, when he was talking about residential loss, you said several times that was the biggest area of concern and potential loss, but then you didn't have the comparison. So how were you able to make that statement?
Through the site visits, through the change. So when I looked at it at the grid scale, when I went out and qualified everything, that's what I was seeing change. So I see what you're saying. We can look. I can look at it, and we'll probably see some differences in the percentage cover from 2009 to 2019. But it was really just looking at those individual 1-acre grid cells, and out of the 200 that I looked at, 65 were single-family residential.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. And the reason I kind of harp on it is because your overall numbers here ring 0 alarm bells, okay, to do anything. And so, if we were going to look at a problem area, which sounds like anecdotally, and according to what you're saying is residential, we would need to have something to hang our hat on, data point wise.
Okay. Yeah, I'll put together 2009 CANOPY at these zoning boundaries and
Perfect. And keep in mind, Tony, R60 is probably our biggest. I know R85's got the most coverage because those lots are big. But
no,
R60
well, so it's the percentage. Look at the number here. Yeah, so R60
R60 is the main
is the
data
one
that we need. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem.
We had a huge addition with Legacy Park, and I think the forest there is amazing. And I'm so glad that that's in this analysis, even if we didn't have it for the impervious surface part. I was wondering if we pulled Legacy out, what these might look like. Because I know we've had significant improvements in canopy at Legacy when we did the site visit, and based on your analysis here too. So I wondered if we could sort of see the numbers without Legacy to better appreciate what it is and how it's helping our city.
Well, I could cut that out and just give you an idea of what the canopy was in 2009 and 2019, or just at one time. That's an easy thing to do.
I figured it'd be an easy thing, and yeah, that'd be really great to have.
You know, I didn't have anything to do this afternoon, but
that's why we're here.
No, you know, I appreciate it. It's fine. I think, again, this is all about having a lot of information to you. And like Rich said, you want to have as much as you can. You need to validate it, and you know, I'm happy to help.
And if you hadn't guessed it, talking with us, we're all about data.
Well, hey, that's great.
For that reason.
Yeah, and I think, like Brian Stone said last night, like what New York City has their kind of think tank, I guess, so to speak, of citizens. It seems like that would you have something similar in Decatur.
I hope we can pull more on that think tank in the future, because there's a lot more knowledge out there in Decatur than we're tapping right now. Yeah.
Michael, this is Steve. When you're doing looking at revising, taking Legacy out, should we also not include the parcel north that was annexed? Because that's heavily forested. Maybe you could give a.
That's a good point, Steve. That little parcel, which
6 acres. Yeah.
Yeah, that orange color above Legacy in the slide you have up. Yes, that's a heavily wooded, and that was also annexed at the same time, but it is zoned mixed use, high density. So it might be nice if you can just pull out both of those parcels.
Well, you know, to be honest, now that you say all this, I have all of this already in a spreadsheet. It's just you can't see it on a map. Each one of these are their own polygons. And so this, I have this in a spreadsheet that says this polygon is this cover and so on. So that shouldn't be very hard to do, to put these numbers in something for you. Yeah, but I can easily pull these two separated.
And Mike, can you speak to when this goes on one map, and it'll be a layer, and so people will be able to see that, right? Click on a parcel and see how much tree canopy is on there, or zoning classification, or how do you know how small that will get to?
It won't get to the parcel.
Okay, just
it won't get to the parcel, but it'll get to each one of these polygons. And here I grouped, so this map, I grouped everything together so it looks like that. But theoretically on the map, if that's a separate polygon, you would be able to click on it and it would tell that individual percentage of canopy right there. Yeah. And so we didn't put in 2013 and 17 numbers because the change was not, when you start to put all those numbers in at that small, it's just noisy. And so you want to know 2009 to 2019. I think for ease of interpretation, that's what you'll be able to do. You'll be able to click on something on the map and it'll say 2009 canopy, 2019 canopy, and then the other classes.
So I think we've taken up enough of Tony and Mike's time. So if there are any last questions, go ahead. Otherwise, I'll let them go. And then certainly if you have additional questions, you can submit them to me or Tony, and we'll try to get those answered. And I believe we are also looking at trying to do a work session for the City Commission, doing the same kind of presentation in the near future. So
And
any other, yeah, Mike?
Yeah, I'll add that over the next few weeks, I'll produce it, put all this into the report that we've been talking about. And I'll submit kind of a 90% complete draft final report and get a kind of one more round of feedback, and that, well, we can get your, feedback throughout that, but here's the report, get one final look at the report, feedback, and then finalize it, put a bow on it, and then talk, possibly present at the work session.
Yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
Thanks again, guys. Fantastic work.
Yeah, no, thanks to y'all for
Absolutely.
being participating.
Yeah, enjoy it.
Yeah.
We're thrilled to have the data.
All right.
Mhm.
Appreciate it. All right, guys, we'll see you.
Have a great weekend.
Yep, you too.
All right. Thank you.
All right, so moving on, Rich, do you want to talk a little bit, and then we'll have a discussion about what Rich sent out to everybody?
Sure. Yeah. So just to recap from our last meeting, we were going over the tree ordinance. We were looking at the recommendations that were brought to us. We were looking at the public comment. We were going to originally, well, we were tasked to kind of take a deeper dive into it. At that time, at the meeting, one of the thoughts were, and I think David Malkin said it too, it was important if we were going to make recommendations to the draft that we kind of get granular and look at it line by line. So that's what I endeavored to do from the very next day. And as I started looking at it, it became apparent to me that it was going to be a very difficult process what I mean by that, it was going to get very difficult to reconcile some of the concerns that were raised by Save Decatur Trees and other members of the community and some of our own concerns on the ESB, and line by line try to reconcile those things with what was in the draft that we had. So based on that, we had many meetings at Natural Systems, meeting after meeting, a bunch of discussions, and we threw around, I suggested, and we threw around the idea that this might just be too big of a task, number one, at this point, and that we might be giving short shrift to the tree ordinance by not handling it the way we handle every other type of plan or master plan, which is to go outside of ourselves, as we just witnessed with Tony and Mike's presentation, and pull in consultants and consultancy. So my recommendation, what I want to talk to the board about today and open for discussion, is that maybe one, why we didn't do that, and probably because we didn't do it the first time around with the tree ordinance, but how do you feel about that approach? Pulling in, I mean, we have most of the work done. So if we did pull in a consultant, it wouldn't be something that would take a very long time, I would imagine, to take what we have as a starting point, kind of square it with some of the issues that we're having, and help to produce a document that's more readable and in line with some of these challenges and suggestions that were made. So that's what I am going to propose and put out on the floor, and see what the other members of the board think.
So the question on the table is whether it makes sense to do some kind of public consultation or broader planning process to support the development of the revised tree ordinance. Is that essentially what you're proposing, Rich?
No, and did you see the letter that I sent out?
Yep.
Yeah. So basically, that sums it up. My suggestion is that the city should put out an RFP for a consultant to draft the tree ordinance. That's what it comes down to in the brass tacks of it. I mean, there's other things we can do, but I mean, what's going to happen if we start, and this is something we can do, but I don't think it's the best practice. I fear what would happen if we start to get granular and make recommendations and try to marry all of these concerns to make the tree ordinance where it needs to be. We are going to be leading by committee. And when that happens, sometimes you get something that's not uniform, and it's not concise, it's not holistic. So To me, it would be nice if we had specialists, consultants who do this, who have done this, who have done tree ordinances before, to come in, look at what we have and draft something that we could use and tweak, but that we could use as our new ordinance.
And Rich, and
That's
you
the
mentioned this in your letter, that there are other plans, policies, practices, and systems that interact with this. You know, the zoning board, Kay's work, planning certainly. Every time they meet with the developer, we've just heard what our threats are and how is it going to interact with these plans and stormwater. And I think that's, you know, just someone whose policy, who has that grasp of policies and that comparative analysis, I think would be helpful. And I
that's
can't,
the basis.
we can't
That's
do that.
the basis
Kids
of my
can't.
opinion. You know, that's the basis of why I came up with this suggestion, Mary Jane. You know, it's just to get somebody who is in the know to put these pieces together. And then at that point, it should be coming to us as an advisory board and to the city, and we get together with everyone involved and say, okay, here's the recommendations. Let's see how we can marry these with the ideas that we have and plug them in. I just think what we have right now, we're not at that point. I know it's been a long time, you know, in the making, which is another interesting thing, right? It's been 2 years, and then it was like, okay, here you go, Rich, you got a month. Let's see if we can make this work. So, you know, I think, you know, I think this might be the best path forward. I'm curious to hear what others think about that.
This is Alan. I think it is the right path forward. I'd like to hear more about your confidence that it won't cause undue delays. I don't know how we can sort of make sure that is the
Good
case.
question. Good point, right? And I don't know the answer to that. And the way I think we would know the answer to that once an RFP was put out. I think we can draft one pretty quick. You know, it's not going to be very different than some of the other RFPs that went out for consultants. We have the recent one for the, I guess it's for climate action that's out there right now. You know, it's not going to be that much different. And then once we see what those responses are, and you know, once we draft the scope of work, it's going to be not, you know, it's not going to be a huge scope of work. And once we see what the responses are, we can get an idea of how long that's going to take. Here's one safety trigger we could have. If the temperature is so high for getting something done right now, if the consultancy and hiring a consultant and to get their work product seems like it's going to take too long, we can have, I mean, the commissioners have it within their ability to have some limited moratorium on portions of, you know, what they might consider the biggest threat to trees in our city. They could certainly, you know, have a temporary stopgap.
Hey, Rich, I want to go back to the question I asked you a few minutes ago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see in your letter that, you know, you're asking that a consultant be hired to draft a new tree ordinance, but is that really what you're asking for? Because if you look at the I guess the second to last paragraph, you say a fresh start is needed. The DTO, while an ordinance, is more akin to our city's other strategic plans. There's a lot in that sentence right there that I think we probably ought to unpack and discuss. But if you really believe that's the case, then aren't we really asking for a consultant to come in and develop like an urban canopy master plan or something along those lines from which a tree ordinance would flow? Because I guess just bringing in a consultant to develop a tree ordinance, I don't know that that's going to accomplish the concerns you lay out, which are completely valid, and the shortcomings which you identify, which again are completely valid.
Yeah, good point. And, you know, and two things that are going on there. One is the wording can be tweaked in this because there's probably some things, like you said, there's a lot to unpack, and we can probably refine that. But the bigger pragmatic answer to the question is there are two things going on. I think that ultimately I would love a consultant to come in. I think it would be in the best interest and create an urban forest master plan, of which the tree ordinance was part. Because I think without that, I mean, look at what Tony, you know, the data that came out. We don't have an issue on paper. We have no issue. We have 56% canopy. which, we'll have to probably change the tree ordinance to higher than 50 because we don't want a reduction, right? Now that we know we got 56%, so we don't have an issue, but anecdotally we have an issue, right? I mean, we see it. So where that comes in is more on the quality layer. So we would probably need an urban forest master plan to address quality issues and how we keep the next generation of trees, the right kind of trees to grow in our city. But I fell short of proposing that, David, only because I didn't want to open up a huge can of worms. So I was thinking more of a 1-2 punch to this. One is hire a consultant to do the smaller lift now. And what I mean by a restart is that the formatting and the way it's written and the structure of the current tree ordinance in the UDO is a little cumbersome. So by fresh start, maybe it just needs to be formatically just completely kind of changed so that it's right-headed and then it's easier to read. And then a second step would be a larger overarching plan for urban forest.
So what you just said there, I think makes a lot of sense, and I think is a lot more palatable, I think, than the way it's currently framed in the letter. Mm-hmm. Maybe it is just a matter of having someone come in to take what's the tremendous amount of work that's already been done and to repackage it in a more logical and accessible manner. While at the same time maybe addressing some of the gaps or shortcomings that we think can be addressed in the near term, and then that second kind of further out step being a urban canopy master plan akin to the various other master plans and that the city develops.
Right. Yeah, and you're right with the wording. Again, that's why this is a draft letter, and that's part of what. I don't know if we were going to be able to actually later on just work on that, or if it has to be, offline, and then we just email to each other and find something that's acceptable. But yes, I mean, this was a first pass. I polished it once with Annie's help and sent it to you guys and was going to get feedback. I didn't want to beat it to death in case the whole idea was like, well, we're not going to do this. But yes, you make a very good recommendation.
Would you guys envision that a plan like this would address the functioning of some of our data monitoring between our canopies studies, our systems in-house that affect tree loss and tree gain?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm hearing what you're saying. Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this with when Jamie Clem came and spoke to us, and she said, yes, as part of my group, we have a person who's a systems person who works with city staff, even small city staff, and helps them to get their sustainability metrics in place to tell you how you're doing on a regular basis.
Here's the other approach, and maybe you want to, swing for the fences, I'll say, maybe our recommendation needs to be that we do bring a consultant on, but we need the consultant to do the big picture right from the very start. We need to have an urban forest master plan, of which a part of that process is going to be the revision of our UDO's tree ordinance. So, I mean, I don't know if you think that the temperature is right to make such a bold move. I mean, based on what I was hearing at the retreat from the commissioners there, they just want to, in some ways, get it off their plate. I mean, they just want this tree ordinance thing done. But, having said that, maybe it is best to take that bigger swing. I'm 50-50 on that. So I kind of will leave that to the general consensus here.
Do you think that Tony's presentation, because of we're over the 50%, will sort of mitigate our desire for an urban forestry master plan today?
Good point.
Yeah, and that I know that is somewhat worrisome to me.
Yeah.
I think we absolutely need that. On the other hand, we need to also deal with the tree ordinance almost immediately. If his point being that the development of these townhomes and then some of the properties that we saw, loss of trees, I mean, I'm not sure which is the chicken and which is the egg in this conversation.
Yes, so great point. And my take on the results, the data that Tony showed us, is the same and a little different to me. And this is why, you know, at first when I was thinking of doing the larger kind of urban forest and larger planning process, I was like, forget about that, Rich. You know, that's going to be a side note. We got to get this, you know, tree ordinance done. But after the data, you know, and seeing that there's no change. And I know there's, like I said, we talked about, there's change in certain areas, but there's no overall change. That might actually extend the appetite for saying, we don't need it. Our tree ordinance is working. This is one way of thinking, okay? Our tree ordinance is working. We don't need to do something just to get it done. But what Tony points out is that the quality of what we have is suffering. And so maybe there will be more of an appetite to say, okay, how do we not only preserve and grow our canopy, but how do we effectively increase the quality of what we have? And the way to do that is not through just the tree ordinance, but it's through a larger master plan.
Well, yeah, and a master plan that would presumably include targets or goals that extend well beyond just a percent canopy tree coverage, right? At a certain point in time. I mean, that's certainly one critical goal or target, but surely there are others that would help inform kind of a more comprehensive ordinance that addresses some of the gaps that you all have identified.
Yeah, and I think Tony's last slide was very critical, because what do people really want? They really want that when necessary development takes place and trees are cut down, what they want is for there to be some accounting of that and some reparation. And Tony said, you know, a green roof or a white roof. You can't, it's not just the trees, it's the effect on our climate and our comfort. And so if such a plan would give our people in these places of power making these decisions, including developers, come to us with a plan that fits into our ethos already. Don't tell us you've done 20 plans that don't fit our ethos, and then we have to try to work it in. You know, so I think what people really want is for everything to be accounted for and for us not to lose. And I think we're getting there with this new study. I think it's fantastic, but we need the tools and the empowerment to do that.
I think Tony had some words that fit exactly with what you're saying. He used the term ecological succession, and how you deal with the total ecology of an area, which is why my question for quadrants, it might be more interesting or easier to implement once we get to a point of something to implement. So I agree with you totally, Mary Jane.
Do we have a sense from city staff who are on this call? Just sort of some of your thoughts on these ideas?
Well, I mean, I'm Hugh Saxon. I just actually first I've heard of this, so would like to give it a little more thought. We do have a urban forestry master plan that was done several years ago. So that's something, I don't know whether y'all are familiar with it. It's something I think it's on our website, but if not, we can send you a copy.
We are. That's great to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you mean the community forest management plan?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I was thinking about the urban forest I was thinking that, you know, part of that work is done, right? We integrate that as, you know, as part of the puzzle. So yeah, so it's basically an urban forest master plan would just be taking off from that, you know. It doesn't have to be huge. I mean, I was looking at one from Tempe, Arizona. I mean, it was only 50 pages long.
They probably got about 50 trees.
Yeah, that's true. They actually only have 29% canopy coverage out there.
Yeah, right. We would not, that wouldn't be a,
No, it's not a model, but
Despite in our metro, despite, and you've heard this from Brian Stone, we're still number 3 in the nation. We have an incredible canopy, but we're number 1 is Phoenix, number 2 is Louisville, and we're number 3. So despite our canopy, it's that relationship between what retains in that heat energy and the trees.
Yeah.
We may have maintained. So we don't want to be number 3. We want to be way on down the list.
Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Andrea, and just want to say thank you to everybody here. And just so y'all know, I listened to Tony's presentation, and I've been popping in and out. I've had other calls and meetings, and I've got one at 11. But I did just hear about the recommendation, kind of this chicken and egg, you know. I mean, do we just go ahead and, you know, push forward with the tree ordinance like Rich says? You know, so much of the work has already been done. We've got some really good momentum right now. And then on the other hand, and I hear you, or, you know, are there some benefits to, you know, pressing pause, pulling back, and looking at this plan? And again, like you said, just now hearing this, nothing that I've heard said is unreasonable. So I think that Hugh and David and Kay and a few of us back at the city, we need to put our heads together. I also think that we've got a little bit of time. We haven't scheduled the work session with the City Commission. I anticipate that will be a March meeting where we'll have the tree canopy presentation made to them. It sounded like Tony was going to do a little more work, a little more tweaking, and before that's brought back to the City Commission. But I think that will be an opportunity to also have that discussion. Once, I think the City Commission, they need to hear the same information that this group just heard. And also, you know, while it was a very positive picture, I mean, I think Tony did a really good job of saying, but there's still plenty of threats and lots of reasons to, you know, to continue taking action. There was nothing I heard that said, just stop, you know, stop what you're doing right now. But just that, hey, we've been doing a really great job, but there's still, you know, there's still plenty of work to be done. So let us think about just the order of things. And obviously we will be engaging with you all through that process and just continuing to keep that communication open. But this is what you're here for. Just like, it was mentioned last night, you know, New York City having this team of experts. And while I know Michael wants to, you know, tap into kind of everybody that's out there, this is a pretty solid team that we have right here. You know, we had some great experts on the call last night, but just you know, making sure that you know, we'll continue to keep y'all engaged, and we'll figure out the right next step. But I really appreciate y'all taking the time to bring this forward to us. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea.
That helps a lot. And I really appreciate that. What you said, Andrea, and Hugh, and yes, and didn't mean to spring this on you guys and Hugh. I know it's the first time you're hearing about it because we just came up with this after we really dug down very deep into what our recommendations could be, and we just came up short with having something that was good enough, you know. And then we wanted to hear what Tony had to say. So that's great. I mean, my recommendation at this point for this meeting is going to be, because of this, I mean, we're talking to the people, Andrea, Hugh, Kay, we're talking to the people that we're going to have to work with on this, and we want to work with on this and are working on this. So there's no need to send a letter at this point. because the ball's already rolling. Let's see what, if you guys kind of get together and think that it's best to, as I said before, swing to the fences and have some larger comprehensive plan that the new tree ordinance can be part of. If that's the way forward, then we'll assist in any way we can. If the tree ordinance is deemed to be the best first move, then we assist, doing that, whether that's bringing someone in to help or whether that's doing what we can. So that would be after what you're saying, Andrea, and what you're saying. And Kay, I assume by your nods that you're probably on the same page. That would be my recommendation then.
Yeah. Rich, if I could just say a couple things. And this may be the product of to a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but what I'm hearing you asking for is kind of a very robust climate adaptation plan, of which trees are like a very critical component, or at least what I'm hearing from Mary Jane and a few others about how you actually integrate this with the overall, or the rest of the UDO and the stormwater plans and green roofs and heat mitigation. And I think that's something that the City Commission has heard as well, that the clean energy plan that we're working on the RFP for is just the start. And that is focused mostly on the mitigation of our emissions, but then there is this whole other piece to this that needs to happen. So that's what I'm hearing. I would like to hear your response to that, but I also think Steve had a few things to say. If you want to go.
Yeah, I can respond to that, or Steve, why don't you say what you're going to say first, and then I'll kind of clarify that.
No, I would just sort of like to exercise caution because, well, it's good news that, we have 50+ tree canopy. That was just a small part of the presentation. We also heard the localized impacts. He specifically went into FORKNER Street. And also we heard that a lot of the gains were from the cemetery, from GLENLAKE, which I think we use as mitigation for trees and public access areas and corridors. Those areas are undisturbed. The trees are growing. They will continue to keep growing. And so I guess I'm concerned that the message may get out. There's no problem, no concern. We've maintained tree canopy. And also just the inherent, plus or minus 5% in the estimate anyway. So that's all I would like to add to this.
Well,
the details are there. There's more to that presentation that we.
In terms of the plus or minus 5%, that's actually something that's very encouraging to me, because even if you put us at 52% in terms of their canopy estimates, that's pretty good. But to your point, I think we really need to look at like the threats, because lots are small and single family are the biggest portion of trees we have, and it's easily identified as the biggest threat. And so we want to make sure that we've got a robust response to keep ourselves in the great place we're in.
Yeah, and I would echo something that we talked about during the presentation of, if you have a geography that you want this data for, let us know. I'm not sure if we have actual shape files or anything with neighborhoods or what have you, but I will say that, and I think a few of y'all have brought this up, that a 57% tree canopy figure doesn't really mean much to somebody if they're living in an area that doesn't have a tree or not a lot of trees. So I think I'm hearing that come from y'all.
Right. So to answer your question, yes, the climate action plan is something that ultimately is the second prong of the umbrella for the energy plan. But it is of course important, but that's not what I was maybe directly referring to. I was thinking that the tree ordinance, in order to be robust enough to address a lot of the points that people raise, like Steve was talking about, the problemed areas, and like David, you just said, 57% canopy coverage can be meaningless to someone living in a certain area where all the big trees have been taken out. I don't know if a UDO tree ordinance, can be robust enough. So what I was suggesting is an overarching, you can call it what you want, but many municipalities call it an urban forest plan, master plan, and have something that a large guiding document that sets forth some of these more sticky kind of things and says, okay, you know, this is what we plan on doing. We identify replanting zones and just a whole bunch of different things can potentially be done. And then out of that, the ordinance, you know, the administrative standards that, you know, what do builders have to do, yada yada, and that is just strengthening kind of what we have already. So what I was suggesting, it wasn't ultimately, yes, we want a climate action plan, but I was suggesting another plan, and it's very similar to, you know, it's just a larger and more detailed version of what we've done before, the community forest management plan. Okay, and we did that, but this just needs to be more robust and something with an eye towards tying in a UDO and with having a more comprehensive, you know, look at it. Not just, I think in the community plan, it was more about, you know, public space only, whereas this would be, and I could be wrong because I didn't read through the whole thing, but this would be more encompassing.
Right, and I think one of the things, Rich, is the ordinance is a go forward, whereas a master plan allows us to go back and address some of the areas that Tony was pointing out to us and to work with those communities in developing the kind of tree spaces that they need to have that forestry. So you have both a go forward and you have the capacity then to also look back and assess and plan for what you can do to move those areas forward.
And it may be, you know, it may be that Hugh and Kay and your teams and stuff, you know, may decide that this is a planning document that you think you can execute, and then put something, you know, out there that we can look at and get public feedback on. I mean, I don't know what the bandwidth is for that. You know, taking a look at other municipalities, and then from that, you can help that to inform your draft revisions of the UDO, which, you know, I mean, you probably, to my mind, I know other people feel differently, you're like, you're not talking about specific tweaks or some numbers that need to be changed. I'm sure you feel maybe you want to change that 50% number after seeing, you know, Tony's presentation, but you're like 90% there on that draft. So, but like, you know, I think a larger guiding document might be imperative so that we avoid some of these pitfalls that we discussed.
I just think given what we've seen, the data and our trends and our threats, that it just deserves deserves more and maybe more than we can currently and possess the expertise to do. And I totally agree that you're on the right track.
Yeah, and I think especially since this doesn't take into account quality and understory, and almost every single family residence we looked at didn't have that quality and understory, we need to address that. Both for climate action, but just for, you know, how things look in our city, and what kinds of things we've got as a community. The ethos that MJ was talking about.
Well, and Allison, you're going to attest to this too. Working in one environment for several years, and I'm talking about Oakhurst, you can see the degradation in a hot summer. You can see it almost immediately. And so our ecology is, you know, it's sensitive.
And what did Brian say last night about the equity issue with that? You know, I mean, you think about these areas, like David said, there are areas that have no trees. So yeah, we're doing great with the 57%, but there's some areas, and some of those areas may be the poorer areas of town. You know, some of the older, you know, homes that have lost some of their big trees, or who knows, but folks that can't quite afford to keep the air conditioning on all the time. And now it's 95 plus for 5 days in a row, or, you know, so anyway, Brian made a very good point on that last night. I thought that was interesting. I would say one other thing about the plan, the urban forestry plan, however it looks, I would think one key component would be a GIS layer, so that the master plan that was developed for how we want our city to look could have a GIS layer that kind of shows, you know, what needs to be done, what the plan is, so that it easily can be envisioned. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that, you know, because when you talk about plans, people may have different ideas of what the plan is going to look like. But I think one crucial component of it would be to put that GIS layer to the plan to, I think, make it easy to, you know, to know what we're doing going forward if we had something like that. easy to measure and quantify.
Do you have an idea of what that would look like, or kind of
Yeah,
what
I mean,
layers
you know,
you would want to overlay
yeah,
to
so this
create
is all
that prioritization?
this is all speaking off the cuff, right? So just brainstorming here. This is not, you know, something that I've had an intense amount of time to think about. But because I came here to kind of specifically address the UDO, and this was a little bit of a back, you know, burn idea that I just started fleshing out, and we need to be fleshed out with the city and with the board and everybody. But, you know, just in my mind, I could see something like, you know, Kay coming up and saying, okay, here's trees that we really lost and need. I took a tree inventory and I see what we're missing. So basically a tree inventory is laid over on a GIS map. And in that master plan, then on top of that inventory, you can show the hotspots of, okay, these trees are going to be here. This is the plan for this type of tree here. And, you know, and just kind of lay out a map of what the city ideally would look like with the different species and varieties of trees and locations of those trees put on the layer.
I think it would also tell us in some regard what trees are overarching over impervious surfaces. I think that would be somewhat helpful. The other is, I thought it was fascinating, on the street in which I live, the city came in and put trees in with Trees Atlanta along that curb area, and then stopped at a certain point. And the other half of the street that I live on have no trees that are covering sidewalk and streets. So we sort of have been doing things, and I point this out because it seems to be sort of random and based on amount of money. There's kind of, this was an area of need, but we could only do half of it. And then you got to explain to the other neighbors, what happened to us? Don't we count? I mean, it's sort of hodgepodge of what's going on. The intentions are good, but it's not following any profound guidance that the city needs. I just use my street as an example, and sometimes I scratch my head and go, we need some sort of a big idea of where we're going. And we also need a way to redress the past. And I think the past is what is so frustrating to the community in which we live. And that's where you get a lot of the anger, and that's where you get a lot of the statements that are made about this, that, and the other. We need to be able to triage both of those in a sense, in a way that is understandable, a go forward, and we know where we're going, and we can explain to the community. That's half the problem.
And yeah, if I can chime in on Annie's statement there, that's one of the reasons I really wanted to go to the front yard tree program, because planting larger trees in those tiny strips eventually is a recipe for disaster. Mm-hmm. Like I said, they identified in the 2015 report, over 159 trees that had to come down in the right-of-ways because they're starting to fall apart. So, you know, that front yard tree program is critical, that we can get people on board with that, having trees planted in their front yard that will grow to cover those areas, both the street and the house. So just want to chime on.
Amen.
Thank you.
Amen, Kay. And amen to that. And, you know, this is part of what this urban forestry plan would address. You know, it would be the roadmap to that type of stuff. And why I love the GIS layers, because you could see where it's needed the most and lay that out and target those planting programs to those specific areas. You know, you're one person now. Even if you added assistance, you're still just going to be a couple people. You need to have a targeted strategy. And I think without the plan, without some sort of plan, it's going to be very, very difficult. So it went beyond the UDO. When I first looked 4 or 5 weeks ago, when I first plugged into this, it was like, okay, this looks good. We're just going to, you know, tie up some loose ends, but it's a bigger story, right? You know, there's more going on here.
Yeah,
this is also definitely. This is how you can engage the neighborhood groups for them to really understand what it is that they can do. Here's the plan. Here's the type of trees that can be planted. Here's our arrangement with the county or Trees Atlanta or a bank of funds to help you put in the trees. I mean, there's a whole cacophony of things that could happen as a result of doing this, that we we could recommend, I think, to
Yeah.
the city as to why that might be a thoughtful way to go.
Well,
Yeah.
thank y'all. I think this brief discussion has yielded a lot of ideas, and I think talking through it has helped me understand kind of what you're asking for. But I think moving forward, I would recommend fleshing out these ideas a little bit more so that Kay and I and Hugh and we can approach David and the rest of the staff to and eventually hope the City Commission to make this recommendation. And then again, I think we asked for this last time. We always ask for similar things, that if you have an example from a comparable city, we would love to see it and see what they did and what we could potentially expect to get out of this. Sometimes those examples are hard to find, but any other resources would be really appreciated. So
absolutely. And I would just add this. I think in order to go forward in a quicker manner that is effective, I would really love to have more communication from Hugh and Kay as to what their thoughts are. So instead of us going like this, potentially heading in the same direction, but going further apart, I want to be like this, right? So I don't want the ESB to be doing something that the city is then like, well, you know, we have limited bandwidth. We're volunteers, you know, we need to be moving in the same direction. And I want to move in a direction that supports UK, because I like, look, your idea with the street trees, I want to be doing that, and I want to support you, and I want to move in that direction. And if we're, yeah, looking at other municipalities, sure, David, we need to do that. But I want to know what your ideas are first. And I want to hear what you think of this conversation. I would like to get some feedback in the next week or so, or at your convenience, to say, all right, we heard what you said, we digested it. This is what we're thinking potentially might be some things we want to do. And then that could start the ball rolling rather than us start going off like this. I don't know if that makes sense to you, Kay and David, but I think instead of us saying, okay, we're going to do this, and then we're going to get together, and so like, you know, you tell us so that we can then better serve you and the city.
Yeah, I think that's spot on.
Yeah, so I'm sure we'll have a debrief either later today or probably sometime next week, and we'll loop in David and probably John Maximuck and a few others potentially, and we'll get those thoughts to you. But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm going to look over the plan that we have, the community, what is that thing called again? The community forest management plan, just to see what they did. I know it's not that robust of a document, but we'll do that. And then maybe you should also include some discussions with.
It's very long.
No, it's not
It's
long.
pretty.
Yeah. And then just also, you know, I know it would be intensive, but I think at some level we'd have to consider a tree inventory, right? I know we did it for the street trees, and we have a GIS layer for the street trees, but I know there would be some, and that would probably be, you know, a little costly, but there might be other ways to skin that, like a voluntary surveys and stuff, you know? So it's just something else to throw into the thought process.
I need to find the resource.
I know we got to go, and I know David and iPhone, you've brought this up, Annie brought it up again, and that is the whole neighborhood zones, or whatever you want to call it. If once you get competition going between those things like tree inventory, I feel like it get easier. It just like the guys with this document today divvied up some stuff for volunteers to do. I think people want to help. They want to be.
Yeah. There are examples of those kind of resources online that I'll go and try to find and get to y'all. So if we want to move on to the next item, Michael.
Well, one other thing just to sort of bring up, so sort of back to the tree ordinance, do we want a stopgap? Do we want to make sure trees are coming first? I mean, there's some pieces that will be critical, I think, to maintaining the trees we've got in residential. That maybe I don't know where the city is and commissioners are, but we may not want to wait for some of those things for a tree master plan like we're proposing, which I think is the way to go. But what do we want to do in the time between now and then. Because remember, this data is from a year ago too. 2 years ago now, 2019. And maybe that's to take a step back and see, but it seems like we want to make sure we've got those pieces in place.
Okay, David, what's the city's kind of, what is your position on your draft UDO? I mean, where are you happy with, to your mind, do you think it's you know, document ready? Do you think what you have is kind of ready to be published? And
Well, we're getting there. I've done a lot of tweaking, taken in a lot of everybody's comments, trying to fit it all together. The latest iteration, which you don't have now, you had the one that was from beginning of January, I think. So we took a lot of input back and made some tweaks again. The version you got was a lot of red lines and blue lines, and it's very hard to read. I cleaned all that up. Hugh is cleaning it up further. And I think really maybe by April, we're ready to present what we have with all that we've taken back. And for me personally, as the city arborist, you know, getting these issues that we all recognize need to be resolved as quickly as possible to stop the loss is kind of important. I mean, just as an example, look at what City of Atlanta has had in place for years. It's been waiting on the back burner. And during that years of waiting, more and more tree loss is occurring. So tree ordinances, just like any other ordinance, can always be changed and modified. But when you see that there's an issue that needs to be resolved to start saving a little more canopy, I think it's good to go ahead and get it in place and get it working, and then take all these other pieces and bring it forward. That's just my opinion as your city arborist. So
yeah, you know, I like that approach, Kay. I like it
Yeah.
very much, and I think it addresses what Michael was talking about as a concern. You know, I know residents will be unhappy if not everything is in there that they want, but like you said, I mean, this is not as a document that, you know, let's say we did instead of having some halfway stopgap measure, the stopgap measure is the new UDO you've been working on. And yes, coming out say, yes, it's not perfect, but we wanted to get something to stop the loss. We tweak it a little bit. We see that thing in April, you know, turn the screws a little bit, get it on the books by May or however soon the commission can vote on it. But at the same time, let the commission know that this is part of the larger puzzle and that we recommend looking at this bigger overall overarching plan for trees in the city. And then that may down the road inform more tweaks to the UDO. You know, I don't think there's anything wrong with doing it that way.
Yeah, we're doing this climate master plan. It all kind of has to work together. So
Yeah.
you know, do what you can to get it right. Go ahead, Mary Jane.
I just have a quick question for you, Kay. And our family is purchasing a property, an investment property in Greater DeKalb, right near Charlie Yates Golf Course. It's a bump out. No trees were ever removed in the process yet. On the map, it says 2 3-inch wide oaks. It specifies the tree, the size, and this is just to increase their canopy. And I'm just wondering if something like that is possible now. Could we write this in?
Sure. I mean, it's pretty standard in every tree ordinance I've had to deal with. In my experience, it almost always calls for front yard tree plantings. I don't know why Decatur originally left that out. I couldn't answer that. I wasn't here. But yeah, I'm not opposed to that, definitely.
Yeah. Now, we don't know where to get 3-inch trees this time of year. That is another issue.
I was going to say, watch your inch sizes. If I can make one thing, the 2-inch to 2.5-inch calipers in 3 years are bigger than a 4-inch caliper that's planted because it acclimatizes quicker and grows better into the space. We've found that out in arboricultural practices over the years. So watch your sizes. Just because you're getting a larger tree, it doesn't mean it's going to be larger in 3 to 4 years as it matures. So.
Interesting.
Can I ask a question? Is it possible in that March presentation that's going to be made in the work session, that somebody from city staff, David and Kay, bring up the idea of doing the urban forest master plan as a follow through to any updating of the of our UDO at the moment. So could we mention that to get that sort of on the table, if you will, as something that we could go forward with fleshing that out by April as part of the presentation. In other words, it gets in their ears is kind of where I'm going.
I hear you, and I'll take that back when we have our meeting with Hugh and David and everybody, Andrea. We'll mention all that, and then we'll come back to you with what we propose, and hopefully that'll be part of the process.
And to David's point, or Rich's point, sorry, to Rich's point of like working on the same path together, I think this is great. If we can get like the new revised version of the tree ordinance so we can take a look at it as natural systems, that would be fantastic. So we're all on the same page when we get closer to March.
Yeah, and I'll mention that to Hugh, that you'd like to see once he's finished with his reworking, so we can send it back out.
A quick administrative question. So, the administrative standards, is that still going to be a relevant document, and is that being reworked too, Kay? Do you know?
It is. And because in the ordinance, you want to set out what your ordinance is, period. And then to go into more detail to explain things, you have your administrative standards that follow suit. Cities and municipalities do ordinances different ways. The city of Decatur chose to bring it out. Like in Brookhaven, they put everything in the ordinance. So there's not an admin standard. So it just depends on how the municipality wants to set it up. And that's how this one was set up prior to me.
And are you working on both of those now? You're working on both those?
Yeah.
Okay. And
I think you said that too.
I'm sorry, you broke
Michael,
up a little bit. Can you say that again?
I'm sorry. I was going to say, I think, Michael, Hugh sent both the admin standard and the.
Yeah.
Yep, he did.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but not the new revisions.
Yeah, but the admin revision, I think, was even older, was from months
Yeah, and
ago.
I have tied those together now so they match up. So yes.
Okay, good. And just for curiosity, where does that reside? Where does the administrative standards reside, either on the website or as a public document? Because I thought it was appended to the UDO, but I don't think it was.
I don't know if it is actually in the UDO document. It is on the website at decaturga.com/trees.
Yeah.
And
that's where I found it. Yeah.
I don't know if they included that in the UDO.
Okay. Yeah, it might not be on the Municode document, but you can find it on the website. Yeah. So just in the interest of time, since we are coming to 11:30, if there are any other additional comments or questions or anything, please send those to me or Kay.
Okay.
But I think we need to move on to the third item, electing the board chair. Michael, do you want to take that away? Thank you, Kay.
Yeah, thanks for
Thank you, Kay. Thank you so much. Keep in touch.
You're welcome. See you.
Thank you, Kay. So if anybody else is interested in running for board chair, I'm not opposed to somebody else taking the position. I didn't get any nominations by email, but you can self-nominate or nominate somebody after. But if,
I nominate Michael Black to continue as chairman of the ESB.
Second.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye. Sorry, Michael, I know we're running low on time, and I just wanted to speak for everybody.
Well, thanks. So that's taken care of. I don't think we really have time for the climate energy plan, and I want to leave time for public comment. David, do we need another meeting? Are we going to need to meet on the 26th?
So I think where I'm at with that is I've sent you the draft RFP. I've gotten some feedback, and thank you for your comments. I'm getting feedback from other city staff. And so I'm comfortable if you just want to send your comments, individually, and I'll do my best to synthesize all the commentary that I get and come up with a new draft. I'll send that out one more time to make sure there are no huge glaring omissions. And then at that point, we'll have it ready to go. There will be a conversation on our end when exactly we want to advertise that, and then when we want to start getting that work done. As you know, we're still in the strategic plan, and then we have a few other things on the books, the Parks and Green Space, and then the downtown master plan. And so on the city staff, we really want to make sure that we're strategic in this and that we can make sure that people are engaged throughout the process, and also just on staff bandwidth that we pull people in when necessary. But I think from the comments I've gotten so far that we're in a pretty good place. And so if you just want to keep on sending those to me, and I'll get that all finalized. And I do want to make one note. The scope of work that's in the RFP right now is pretty extensive. It might not necessarily be something that we have the funding to do all right now based on the budget that was allocated in this revised 2021 budget. And so there are a few things that I are going to want to try to get cost estimates for and potentially pull out to make budget recommendations for 21-22, because that is on the horizon. If y'all are comfortable with that, I think that's where I was leaning.
Thank you, David. Is everybody comfortable with that? Just to sort of, anybody not comfortable with that approach? All right, great. So let's open it up for public comment. People who may have public comment.
I'll jump in.
Go for it.
Sherry Koenig. Thank you guys for your kind of attention to the CANOPY measurement study. It's a lot to take in, so I appreciate, David, you recording it as well. I really would like to support, we do need to stop the loss now. So I think that there are meaningful improvements that can be made to the tree ordinance. I understand this idea of something that might be larger and overarching. Maybe it's an output from the 2030 strategic planning, the larger overall climate change plan. But I think there are some things that we know that we can and should do now that are a risk, and that are taking place on a day-to-day basis in our neighborhoods. So I would like to put that forward. I do think that there are things that we can learn from the city of Atlanta regarding their approach. And that may be some things that we could use that would be a model that look at things a little more integrated. While we may not have, dramatic net loss and canopy measure, we know that replanted trees are not the same as sort of older trees in more original soil. And I mean, I think we've seen that as a city with the impacts to the stormwater, the flooding, and hence all of the effort and frankly, consulting dollars needed around the stormwater master plan. So I think, there are things that could be moved forward and should be moved forward. I appreciate the need that there is a larger, perhaps more encompassing need to look at that, but I just want to put that out there. I think you guys, I mean, the people have been on the board, and my cat clearly agrees with this. So the people have been on the board for, a number of years. This has been kind of a 3-year conversation, right? And we're still with the same tree ordinance in effect every day as we had 3 years ago. And that's a problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Sherry. You can raise your hand or you can unmute yourself and pipe in. Go ahead, Betty.
Let me second what Sherry, this has been a 3-year process. we still have the same tree ordinance. The trees are still coming down. I'm driving and crying on the 2 streets next to me on Pine Tree, where huge trees have just come down. I don't know if what's happened today is going to result in a new tree ordinance, and having spent hours with a couple of our people going over the current, it is so confusing. It is so, it contradicts itself from one page to the next. We have spent hours and hours and hours looking at that. I'm all for just starting over. Get someone in, write a simplified, strong tree ordinance. Thank you. Thank you all on this board. You all know I think the ESB is just composed of the best people in the city. So thank you, all of your work and dedication.
Thank you, Betty.
Thank you, Betty. Ash?
Yeah, I would just further some of those points and a couple observations from the CANOPY study. I think it's tempting to say, oh, no net loss, we're doing fine. And I think that's a profound misreading of the study, as I think we're all aware, the quality issue. The canopy is not the same quality from young trees. And as Tony pointed out, we have so many amazing older trees that need preservation in this city. And the vast majority of our canopy, it's clear, he said, is in private hands. So in fact, the tree ordinance is the only way to reach and protect those trees. Right now, we are essentially the public policy right now is to gamble with our canopy. You know, every private property owner can cut down 3 trees, no questions asked, and maybe it will be called maintenance cutting someday in a study. I mean, this is not a policy, this is rolling the dice. This is why we need to revise the ordinance, and it doesn't have to be hard. You take that number 3 and you change it to a 1, and you have preserved so many trees in this city. So I urge this board, do not miss this opportunity. We have the city council's attention. Let's do something as big as we can get, but let's stay focused on that ordinance, whether we hire a consultant or not. We need to stay focused on that. Another interesting thing I noticed in the CANOPY study was a 4% increase in impervious surface. I think once we scratch the surface of that study, we're going to see some pretty serious loss of quality. That's 120 acres of pavement in the city that has been gained. So we've lost 11 acres of trees. I'm just taking the numbers on their face. We've lost 11 acres of trees and we've gained 120 acres of impervious surface. This is not great. We need to protect these high quality trees that we have right now. That's the most efficient way to promote all of our climate goals. We have so many great plans already on the shelf. I think we can rely on all of the excellent language that says we need to be a leader in climate and sustainability, in preservation of our tree canopy. Now's the time to capitalize on this moment, revise that code, do as much as we can right now, and keep this momentum going. And I thank you all for all of your great work.
Searching out to see if anyone else is interested. If you are, I don't think I have anybody else piping in, so you can unmute yourself and pipe in. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. Sorry to be over by 6 minutes. We look forward to continuing to work with you, and we very much appreciate all the public input and the public participation in our meeting.
Thank you. You guys have a good weekend.
Thanks.
Bye.
Hello.